Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So, as you probably know, usually on Thursdays, we do a tier deck tech, but I want to switch it up this week, and I think moving forward, we're probably going to have a mixture on Thursdays. Some weeks it'll be tier, other weeks it will be throwback or time travel Thursdays, and that's what we're doing this week. We are going back very far in the game's history. In fact, the significance of this blue-white control deck that we're looking at today, which comes from a player by the name of Michael Lecanto, isn't so much the deck itself, but this is the winning deck of the very first ever Magic Pro Tour, going all the way back to 1996 in New York, and the event itself is super interesting. There's an article by Brian David Marshall, an oral history of the first Pro Tour that was published on the Mothership. If you're interested in some of the history of the first Pro Tour, it's actually just really interesting. It's so much different than what would come afterwards. Because some of the big things, just to cover them quickly, for one thing, basically you called in. They ended up with 239 players, but pretty much if you wanted to play the Pro Tour, you called in and speed dialed your way in. If you were one of the first however many people, you got to play in the Pro Tour. They also did invite some of the best players at the time by invitation, but that's kind of how you got there. There weren't qualifiers and all that stuff. They also changed up some of the rules. Before this, you would draw a card on your first turn, no matter what, even if you're on the player of the draw. This is the first time they instituted the play draw rule, so you only drew a card if you were on the draw and not on the play. So that was kind of a change, and the format itself was pretty interesting because they had a rule where you had to play at least 5 cards from every expansion ever printed. So this was kind of the Homeland's Fallen Empires rule. Basically, those sets were so bad that if you didn't have to, you just wouldn't play them. So they actually instituted a rule that forced you to play cards from every set. Anyway, let's talk about this blue-white control deck that won the first ever Magic Pro Tour. Maybe the most interesting part of this deck is just how far some things have come. The way the deck could actually win the game was 2 copies of Blinking Spirit. A 4-mana 2/2 with an ability where you could pay 0 and return it to your hand. It's so bad. Like, almost unbelievably bad. And this was a rare. If this was printed today, you'd expect a 4-mana, maybe 3/4, 3/3, 4/4, and maybe instead of returning to your hand, you could just blink it, like exile and return it to the battlefield. Nope, 2/2 for 4, 0 to bounce it back to your hand. Then, of course, you gotta pay 4 mana, but if you can play the control game, eventually, your Blinking Spirits will get the job done. Also, as a backup plan, you got Mishra's Factory, turns into a 2/2 beatdown, they can pump each other up. If you're not winning with creature beats, you can go on the Millstone plan. So, 2-mana artifact, pay 2, tap it, you mill 2. So if you can get all 3 of your millstones out, for only 6 mana, you can mill 6 cards a turn, and that will eventually eat away your opponent's library and win you the game. If things are getting a bit sketchy, and you might run out of cards in your library, you can always use Felden's Cane to shuffle your graveyard back in, exiling Felden's Cane along the way. Basically, the first Elixir of Immortality, but way worse than Elixir of Immortality. And then you can try to win with your opponent's creatures with Control Magic. As far as removal, the removal spells were actually pretty good. Control Magic steals a creature of your opponent. Sword to Plowshare, still just the best removal in white ever printed. And then Icy Manipulator, for only 1 mana, you can tap down pretty much anything. So this can keep you from dying to a creature, but can also just kind of mana screw your opponent. Tap down a land every one of your opponent's upkeeps, they're a mana short. And then you have some actual sweepers. Wrath of God just gets rid of everything. And then the Wombo combo. And you notice some 1s where you would expect more than that. Like, Balance is an absurd Magic card. It's a little odd that there would only be a 1 of in a deck. That's because there was actually a restricted list back in the day. And Balance and Zuranorb were both on it because they interacted with each other. So the plan here was you would Balance, and then you could sack all of your lands to Zuranorb. Haha, opponent, I have no lands. You have no lands either. I gotcha. I still have maybe my Blinking Spirit mana floating, so after all you do all this, your opponent has no lands, you floated 4 mana, boom, Blinking Spirit, 10 turns later, your 2/2 gets there, and if your opponent draws the swords or something, you can always bounce it back to your hand. Oh, early days of Magic. And then, if you can't gain enough life with your Zoran Orb, you have literal Fountain of Youth, 0 mana artifact, pay 2, tap it, gain a life, and then Ivory Tower just kind of sits out on the battlefield, and if you have a handful of cards, which in a control deck you probably will, gains you a bunch of life every turn. And then, in a testament to just how weird Magic was back in the day, the Pro Tour winning deck had 4 main deck disenchants. You just don't see that today. Artifacts and enchantments, even in an artifact and enchantment set where we're at now, people are running maybe sometimes 1 main deck artifact and enchantment removal spell. Back then, 4 in the main deck, because you got so many artifacts and enchantments to deal with. Literal counterspell and deflection let you disrupt your opponent, and then land tax and hallowed ground generate card advantage. Hallowed Ground, I guess, is a way you can save your Mishra's Factory from a removal spell. You just bounce it back to your hand, and then you can replay it. I'm assuming this was one of the fulfill the set requirements. Couldn't find another Ice Age card you really wanted, so Hallowed Ground makes the cut. And then Recall lets you discard a bunch of jank from your hand to get back your good cards. So if you're running out of counter spells, removal, wraths, you can just discard your bad cards, get back some good ones from your graveyard, and keep going. As far as the mana base, oh man, this is so beautiful. So Adakar Waste is a legit dual land. It still sees play in Modern and Eldrazi decks. It's actually not bad. So one good dual land. Then we have Ruins of Tokir and Sylvanite Temple. These ones, okay, they fulfill some of your Fallen Empire's requirements. You gotta make do where you can. It comes into play tapped. It only adds a mana, but you can sack it to add 2 mana, so I can kind of see the justification. But then, oh my goodness, good land, okay land, Wizard School. This might be the worst cycle of dual lands in the history of Magic. I think if we were to rank all the cycles of dual lands, this cycle would be at the bottom. So, and these, I believe, were uncommons, or were they rares back in the day? Regardless, it enters untapped, so that's good. It taps to add a colorless, okay. You can pay a mana and tap it, so you're essentially using 2 mana to make a blue mana, but oh wait, it gets better. You can pay 2 and tap it, so you're using 3 mana because you gotta tap Wizard School to make a white or a black. Oh, the most expensive way to fix your mana in the history of Magic, but it fulfills the requirements of having cards from every set. As far as the rest of the mana base, we get some basics, 1 Strip Mine, also restricted, and as I mentioned before, the 4 Mishra's Factories as a win con. As far as the sideboard, this is where we really see the impact of having to play 5 cards from each set, because that includes main deck and sideboard. So one of the techniques was to pick the best of the horrible cards from Fallen Empires and Homeland, stick them in your sideboard. Maybe they have some use in really fringe scenarios, but you don't really want to bring them in most matchups. Sea Sprite, it's good, I guess, if you're up against a mono red deck or something. 1/1 for 2, has flying and protection from red. Aeoliophile, some removal, not good removal, 3 mana to deal 2 damage, essentially. Can't hit players, though, so it's like a colorless shock that costs 3 times as much as a shock. Serrated Arrows was a really popular choice because at least it does something, lets you deal with creatures that have protection. If your opponent's on the Sea Sprite plan and you don't have a way to deal with it, Serrated Arrows will take care of it. Jester's Cap deals with combo decks, exiling 3 cards from your opponent's library. Hydroblast and Circle of Protection Red are actually pretty legit. They're very good against red decks, countering stuff or preventing the damage. Divine Offering gives you even more artifact removal. Steal Artifact, even better than killing your opponent's artifacts. You can just take them for yourself. A little expensive, yes, but... And then another control magic, and that is Blue-White Control, the deck that won the first ever MTG Pro Tour back in New York in 1996, and that is our Time Travel Thursday instant deck tech for this week. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.